Hi, Dr. Bailey and classmates. My name is Tamela Calvin, and today I will be presenting my research paper on the attribution theory and the behavior of grief. I would first like to start by talking about the attribution theory a little bit. So, the attribution theory deals with the way humans make inferences about the causes of behavior, both their own and that of others. It also is essentially the process of trying to figure out why people behave in certain ways. Fitzheider, social psychologist, author of The Psychology of Interpersonal Relations, first documented the attribution theory in 1958. He decided that was a three-process step for determining attributions of situations. So the first step is observation of the behavior. He determined that we should first observe what's going on with the person. Why are they behaving a certain way? What caused the behavior? Second, he said assessment of intent refers to examining how someone reacts when faced with other situations that may be similar in nature. So what this means is if someone acted a certain way from one situation, did they do this in the past for something similar to that situation or a similar situation? And the third process is attribution about the source of the motivation, whether it's internal or external. This refers to finding out what is motivating the behavior of the person. It also examines whether the motivation is coming from an internal or an external source. There were other psychologists who decided that Fitzheider's work maybe could have used a little bit more help. So we'll start with Harold Kelly first. He's also a social psychologist. In 1967, he added to the literature of how the attribution theory works. He decided that there was three additional guidelines that needed to happen in order for us to determine the attributes of a situation. The first is consistency, second is distinctiveness, and the third is consensus. The third psychologist is Bernard Wiener. Wiener developed a theoretical framework for the attribution theory. Most people want to know why events happen in their lives, said Wiener. His work is greatly used to assess achievement in the world of psychology. So we were asked to ask the question: is there a consensus for our theory? I determined that yes, there definitely was a consensus among the psychologists for the theory of attribution. I said this because all of the psychologists who decided to explore the attribution a little further than Fitzheider, they all determined that he was definitely on to something, but maybe the process of getting there needed a little bit more work. So overall, I said yes, there definitely was a consensus for the attribution theory among the specialists for this area. So from there, I decided to go with observation of the behavior. So I decided to use the situation of grief among a family. So we're going to observe what caused the grief. In my analysis, I took a family that had recently lost a loved one due to a prolonged battle with cancer. Due to the cancer, the family definitely went through the process of grief. But a few months passed, and upon observing the family after a few months, the daughter and one of the grandsons were having issues with moving past or through the processes of grief. But it wasn't just your normal problems with it. It was withdrawal, feelings of loneliness, feelings of no one understood, and thoughts of even suicide. And so those things were severe considering what we are told from my research the stages of grief are. So we'll go from there with the stages of grief. So there are three stages of grief. There's denial and shock, intense concern, despair, and depression. So the next step would be assessment of intent. How did the daughter and son react after loss of other loved ones? Did they go through the grieving process well or exhibit similar behavior when this happened to them? So in determining that, we decided to check with some of the family members to see if they acted or behaved the same way when they lost other close family members. And so that helped us to determine the intent of the process. So third, we want to look at the attribution about the source of motivation. So, attribution about the source of motivation refers to finding out what is motivating the behavior of the person. It also examines whether the motivation is coming from an internal or an external source. As mentioned earlier in my paper, I'm going to talk about the PGD, or prolonged grief disorder. So this disorder is not your normal process of going through grief. It's a prolonged grief disorder. And if that's the case for my case study, that would mean that this would be an internal reason for them to behave the way they're behaving. In determining that, I also would like to look at what could be an external source for their behavior. The external source, I said, could be that the two family members who were having a hard time processing the grief. I felt that an external source could possibly be enjoying the attention from others, from coworkers and family and friends, enjoying it. And if that's the case, it could be an external reason for them to have the PGD, or prolonged grief disorder. In my research paper, I did see that people who exhibit the PGD definitely would need to get some type of external help to guide them through this process, such as counseling. And so there's several sources that I will list in my paper to just give references as to what type of counseling those persons maybe could use to help get through that process. In conclusion of my paper, I did determine that that grief is something we can't control. It's definitely something that the loss of a loved one is something we all will go through at some point in our lives. And I know that people grieve differently. People grieve differently, and that's okay that they grieve differently. But in cases of prolonged grief, a person should seek counseling to help them through that process, and they should even find out or determine if they are experiencing that to get them help. Thank you for joining me today for my presentation of the attribution theory and the behavior of grief.